As soon as those things landed, Mimi started trembling in fear, all the while wondering what exactly they were. Christina, who seemed to be observing meticulously, theorized that they might be combat robots, and it seemed their target was them. Without a moment's hesitation, Elma and Hiro immediately sprang into action to ensure everyone's safety. With their high-tech laser guns, the two of them took down nearly half of the robots in an instant. And that's also why, when Elma joined the fight, the situation was finally brought under control. Fortunately, the laser guns were effective against them. It was a good thing Elma and Hiro acted early before the robots could do anything, giving them a slight advantage. But to get a better understanding of what was happening, Elma and Hiro asked May if the fireballs they had seen earlier were these things. Based on the data, it seemed that was confirmed. The defense forces deployed on the island were engaging them. The laser guns were effective, but their armor could withstand a few full-power shots. To ensure they had enough energy to defeat more robots, Hiro asked Elma how many energy packs they had left. After checking, Elma confirmed she still had 2 packs while Hiro had 4. So Hiro decided to give Elma a pack right then and there. However, Elma quickly refused to take the energy pack. She said that, even though she didn't want to admit it, she knew very well that Hiro was the best shot in the group. Therefore, it would make more sense for him to keep it. After reaching an agreement, the group began to move forward. Based on the surrounding chaos, it seemed they wouldn't be able to reach the Krishna in this condition. The island's defense system was active, but the enemy forces were too powerful. Even more surprisingly, the defense systems here were quite unique. From a gorilla and a coconut to a crab, they were all superior defense robots on this planet. However, the enemy also had powerful combat robots, creating a stalemate that made the situation impossible to call. This made Mimi worry about Krishna, but Hiro reassured the group not to worry too much. Krishna was probably fine, as he had activated a shield remotely earlier. Even so, Hiro still advised that the group should go check on him as soon as possible. That's why they needed to help their allies defeat these monsters, despite their feelings of anxiety and suspense. Hiro tried to muster the courage to confront the robots on his own. As he took a deep breath, he quickly took aim at an enemy with his laser gun. Fortunately, though it wasn't easy, he was still able to defeat the enemy. After the battle, Mimi immediately ran to Hiro's side to check if he was okay. Lately, Hiro had noticed that whenever he held his breath, everything seemed to move in slow motion. Although he didn't understand why, Hiro decided to push that worry aside, since they had so much to do right now. After fighting the previous robot, Hiro discovered their weak point was the arm with the laser gun attached. He quickly informed Elma of this. Elma took note and used this information effectively, while their allies continued to provide support. Elma and Hiro also gave it their all to secure victory, no matter how difficult it was. After a long and exhausting battle, they finally made it back to Krishna. However, the question now was what to do next, since the Krishna was the safest place for the time being. According to Hiro, as long as they kept an eye out while the defense system held the enemy back, staying and defending could be a viable plan. However, the situation outside was not looking good. According to May's system analysis, many small pirate ships were landing, and a large ship was conducting an orbital bombardment on various targets. The island would soon become a target of the bombardment too. May suggested they send a distress signal to the Empire to report the situation, but there seemed to be no response. This meant the communication system was likely being jammed. Therefore, staying here was not a safe option. Faced with this situation, Hiro had no choice but to decide to leave immediately. As they took off, Hiro asked the team members to check all the systems to ensure there would be no problems moving forward, because the number of enemies scattered about was enormous. At this point, Mimi felt overwhelmed, unsure of what they should be most wary of, even though there were obviously many significant threats. Hiro said the most important thing for now was to focus on finding and dealing with the small ships, while also taking down any that were chasing them. However, before they began, Elma wondered if Hiro had any experience fighting in these gravity conditions. Although Hiro had none, he figured the pirates were surely even less experienced. So that was the only advantage they could rely on. As multiple contacts approached rapidly, the group didn't hesitate and began changing their trajectory to engage. The pirates never expected to be ambushed, and in the current situation, it would be difficult for them to avoid being shot down. Mimi suggested that they should start their attack from orbit, because while predicting the enemy's trajectory made them easy to evade, these diversionary attacks were still a nuisance. The pirate ships landing in the distance began to converge, which meant they were getting serious. At this point, the team had to choose their targets wisely, though they didn't expect to gain much from any of their options. What was noteworthy was that the pirate ships were still remaining calm, but it seemed they were also starting to launch a rear attack with stealth missiles that were closing in. As the group tried to break through the cloud layers, Hiro instructed Elma to deploy jamming flares. Explosions went off everywhere, making the atmosphere even more chaotic and noisy. The team wondered if they could actually hit the pirates as they had predicted. As the cloud layers began to clear, they realized the pirates were actually quite skilled. Even so, Hiro and his team didn't fly by aerodynamic principles, and this maneuver wasn't much different from flying in space. More importantly, the pirate ship that had escaped seemed to be hiding in the cloud layers. However, there was no need to worry as they could still see it on infrared. Wasting no time, Hiro immediately ordered the group to give chase. However, before they could catch the ship, it was taken down by their allies with a kinetic round. This disappointed Hiro as the reward he was hoping for had gone to waste. Elma began to wonder if the enemy was losing its composure, having failed to coordinate and contain their group, while also not anticipating a counterattack. Either way, this was their chance to act. Before it was too late, Hiro urged the team to wipe out the enemy before their allies could cause any friendly fire and snatch all the rewards. Unfortunately, it seemed they had already wiped out most of the enemies in the area. But Mimi wondered, didn't they still have to deal with the ones bombing them? Although Hiro wanted to attack, even the Krishna's weapons couldn't reach the enemy. Besides, they needed a stable route to pass through the gravity well, and if they weren't careful, they'd definitely be shot down. While the group was wondering what to do about the situation, a large, unexpected explosion occurred, surprising even Hiro. Upon checking, they realized it was a bombardment from the weapon launchers of the resource miners, which showed that these devices weren't just for transporting cargo. Although enemy forces were present in orbit, there was no reason to worry, because not only had their team succeeded in neutralizing the jamming, but an Imperial fleet was also approaching fast, based on the reports May received. Hearing this news, Hiro was thrilled, as it meant they could easily finish off the stragglers and collect the rewards. However, before they could do that, the fleet instructed them to let them handle the rest. Just when Hiro thought everything was going smoothly, an object on a ballistic trajectory suddenly appeared, and the enemy's response began to fade. It turned out to be a bombardment using smart warheads controlled by the weapon launchers, and Miro was the one directly controlling the trajectory and detonation point, which simply demonstrated the incredible capability of these devices. As the group drew closer, the Imperial Space Anti-Piracy Automated Fleet tried to contact them via the broad signal comms device, demanding they cease all hostile actions immediately in the name of His Imperial Majesty. The team was reminded that any further acts of violence would not be tolerated. Although they were a little disappointed they couldn't collect as many rewards as they had hoped, they were at least relieved that the space fleet had arrived in time. Speaking of the fleet, aboard one of its vessels, Serena looked rather pale and tired, but instead of returning to the city to see a doctor, she decided to join this mission, seeing it as a good opportunity. Besides, with her new assignment, she needed to do as good a job as possible. Since the fleet had taken over the entire mission, Hiro and his team decided to take a short break, stopping at a place that looked like a beach. Mimi was ecstatic as she watched the meteor shower unfolding in the sky, and while it was undeniably beautiful, Hiro wasn't very interested, since he knew it was just debris from the pirate ships. Elma agreed, calling them nothing more than filthy meteorites. Mimi couldn't help but be disappointed by their comments, saying they should at least try to be romantic, just for once. However, setting aside the filthy meteor shower, Miro's bombardment with the weapon launcher had wiped out the pirates in the independent anti-piracy fleet. The decisive attack dealing a fatal blow, Miro and the Imperial forces were handling the aftermath, while Hiro and his team were simply waiting. While they were stuck in this position, Elma wondered if Hiro planned on contacting Serena, as Hiro hadn't originally intended to, but now that Elma brought it up, he realized it would be safer to contact her. Besides, he also thought it was time for Christina to send a message to her grandfather, who had probably already begun to make moves to rescue her. But at the same time, that also meant her uncle was likely being backed into a corner. Now, Hiro wondered, what would a man like her uncle do next? Elma joked that Chris's uncle might generously admit his guilt and surrender, but since that was completely out of character, the group ultimately guessed that he would probably go all out and become even more determined to hunt Chris down. With that, Mimi went on to say that they should contact Serena now, since she owed Hiro enough to ensure their safety. Speaking of Serena, it seemed like Christina was the only one who didn't know who she was. So the three of them started explaining everything to her. Some of their remarks were pretty sarcastic, but there was no denying that Elma seemed to have gotten their point in some way. However, when Hiro mentioned that Serena was the daughter of a Count Halls, Christina started to remember something. From what she knew, the Halls were a famous family, having produced many military cabinet officials and generals over several generations. After Christina mentioned this, Hiro went on to ask her if nobles would ask the military for help, but before Christina could fully answer his question. Elma cut them off, saying that Christina didn't need to worry about that anymore, since they could just use Hiro's connections for the time being. As it turned out, Elma had been building up some frustration about Serena constantly taking advantage of them, and she thought it would be better if things changed, just for once. Hearing this, Hiro realized that Elma was planning to pin all the blame on Serena if anything went wrong. With that, it was safe to say it was time for them to contact Serena. Before doing so, Hiro informed Miro that their vacation would be ending today, and that they would be leaving the planet. Also, they couldn't really call it a vacation anymore, since they had found a good connection they could use at the right time. Although Miro was sad to hear this news, it couldn't be helped. While Hiro and the girls prepared to leave, Miro assured them that he would handle the departure procedures. But before he forgot, he asked Hiro if he was going to buy May, the maid robot, since Mimi didn't want to leave May behind, and Elma thought her specs could bring a lot of peace of mind to the group. In the end, Hiro decided to buy May, even though he knew it was a bit much for him, but having May around would be a huge help. And he also realized that Mimi and Elma both agreed with the decision, which was the only thing that mattered to Hiro. Once the decision was official, their group boarded the ship and began their journey. Meanwhile, aboard the fleet's ship, Serena's assistant seemed increasingly worried, as she appeared to have a bad cold, which Serena found strange since the medical checkup didn't detect anything unusual. Even though she was feeling under the weather, Serena's subordinates reported that they were receiving a signal from a ship leaving Sierra 3, not knowing who it was. Serena was very surprised to see that it was Hiro and his group. When they were allowed to come aboard and speak with Serena, Hiro tried to be as polite as possible, but Serena shot that down, saying there was no need to be so formal. As the meeting began, it was clear there was still tension between the two. Serena started by talking about Hiro's chaotic vacation, and Hiro immediately fired back, saying the military had been a little slow, which made him have to earn a little money from it. On top of that, he informed Serena about their wonderful week-long vacation, which Serena took as bragging. She demanded that he stop right there, or else. But as the conversation started to get more serious, Hiro immediately asked her if she felt something was off about the space pirates, just like he did. Serena thought so too and asked Hiro to explain further. Since he had noted everything on his tablet, he simply showed it to Serena. After skimming through it, Serena found it strange that the space pirates had stealth landing crafts, something that was only used by the military. This made her wonder how Balthazar could have gotten them. Since Hiro also needed someone to cover for him, he decided to negotiate with Serena. She was a little hesitant at first, but when Hiro reminded her that she still owed him, she ended up hiring Hiro as a bodyguard for the supply convoy. That same day, as everyone was getting ready to rest after a long and tiring day, while Hiro was in his room, he heard a knock on his door late at night. He immediately wondered who could be there. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see Christina standing there, seemingly with something to ask. After she sat down, Hiro immediately asked if she was tired. After everything that had happened, Hiro felt that battling gravity like that must have been tough for Christina. However, there was no denying that Christina felt it was all worth it, because for her, being with the three was always full of excitement and a bit of fun. Before Christina could get too excited and energetic about it, Hiro informed her that it wasn't always this intense. He also felt sorry that their vacation had been cut short. As the conversation continued, it seemed Hiro was finally beginning to wonder what was truly important to Christina. Sensing he understood what this was about, Hiro gestured for Christina to sit down next to him on the bed. A little embarrassed, Christina did as Hiro instructed. Although it was hard to say, Christina slowly gathered the courage to ask Hiro if he liked tall, feminine girls with large chests like May. After hearing this question, Hiro realized that he had been right all along. Without hesitation, he told Christina that while he was happy she liked him, he wanted to make it clear that he had no intention of approaching her that way. He was a mercenary, so he couldn't act like that with his client and someone he was supposed to. Besides, I'm also trying to do right by your grandfather, and that's a matter of trust. I'm not saying I don't understand the interests of girls your age, but I feel like you should wait until you're a bit more mature. Hiro went on thinking that Christina didn't need to rush things, but before he could even finish his thought, Christina quickly reacted in a way that took Hiro by surprise. She jumped right into his arms, pinning him down on the bed, and started saying in a sweet voice that she could only be with him like this until her grandfather came to get her. Hearing this, Hiro slowly realized that it might actually be true, because once everything with her uncle was over, Christina would be the sole heir to the Dwarven family. Although Hiro didn't know much about the nobles in this world, he could only assume that Christina would have to marry someone of suitable status arranged by her family. This meant that no matter how old Christina got, a mercenary like him would never stand a chance. Hiro started to wonder whether he should just go along with this. But before he could make a decision, Christina had fallen asleep in his arms. Watching her sleeping so peacefully, Hiro decided that since this was all he could do for now, he would grant his little princess's wish for the short time they had left together. The next morning, when Christina woke up, she immediately became embarrassed when she realized she was holding on to Hiro tightly. The whole room suddenly became tense with Christina's awkwardness. Hiro tried to lighten the mood by saying, "Good morning," to Christina, and she greeted him back. As they stepped out of the room to prepare breakfast, Elma immediately greeted them with a suspicious look, wondering what the two of them had been up to last night. Hiro quickly spoke up, looking worried, saying he could explain everything, but before he could even say a word, it seemed Elma already knew what was going on. She was disappointed that Hiro had broken his promise not to do anything with Christina. Hiro tried to get Christina's help, hoping they could clear things up, but instead of helping, Christina just blushed, thinking about what happened last night, making the misunderstanding even worse. However, contrary to what everyone might think, it turned out that Hiro and Christina had simply slept next to each other last night. Although Elma didn't believe Hiro's words since Christina also agreed with his story, she finally had to accept it. However, she reminded them to be more mindful of their dignity next time, because Christina's actions could affect many people, and she needed to remember that she was of a noble bloodline. Even though the matter had become more serious, Christina seemed quite ashamed of what had happened. Mimi stepped in to de-escalate the tense atmosphere, making sure things didn't go too far. She told Elma that they should just drop it, until both of them had learned their lesson. However, as Mimi spoke up, Elma suddenly realized that she was supposed to have slept with Christina last night, and this made Elma wonder if Mimi had a hand in what happened. Although the discussion didn't end easily, everyone eventually went back to their own tasks. Later that day, after a tense morning, Hiro and his team members began their work. As Hiro sat down in the main pilot's seat, he felt reassured knowing that the Krishna was doing well, and that things were stabilizing after the pirate battle the day before. He was also happy that they were handling the mission Serena gave them well, even if it didn't seem like a very high-profile job. Currently, they were assigned to protect the civilian cargo ship, Pelican 4, a vessel owned by the Halls family, which was also Serena's property. So, if this ship were attacked by pirates, Serena's fleet would be here in 2 or 3 minutes. If pirates attacked, this ship was only defended by a single mercenary vessel, before military ships would arrive to crush them. Basically, it was live bait for space pirates. Hiro was just happy they were applying what he had taught them. It was a pretty easy job unless they caught a fish. But Christina's uncle was also on board, so Elma and Hiro had to take turns on watch duty, as they couldn't risk losing this job right now. While Hiro was working, May brought him something to drink. Seeing how diligent and wonderful May was, Hiro started to feel guilty, because they couldn't upgrade her yet due to their limited budget. However, it seemed May was completely fine with that, and even reassured Hiro that he didn't need to worry about it. To her, the safety of everyone on board was the most important thing, and even if she couldn't fight or perform complex calculations, she was still grateful to be able to serve everyone, especially Hiro, with her current body. Hearing this, Hiro was genuinely amazed, even though May was supposed to be just a robot. She acted, thought, and spoke like a mature human being, so Hiro reminded her that if she had any requests for her upgrade, she could always let him know. If there was anything she wanted to change from his original configuration, they could always figure out a way to make it happen for her. Once everything was settled, Hiro continued to check their surroundings. Based on the readings, it seemed unlikely anything would happen the next day, especially since the pirates in this sector had suffered heavy losses yesterday. According to the intel, about 200 of their ships had been shot down, which meant that Sierra 3's defense systems and Serena's fleet were truly incredible. Once Hiro brought up Serena, May quickly asked when he and an Imperial officer had gotten so close, as she hadn't really expected him to have a relationship with her. Hiro immediately replied that it wasn't really a relationship, but just a joke that fate was playing on him. But it seemed that wasn't the only thing that made Mei suspicious of Hiro. Besides his connection to Serena, it appeared that neither the ship nor Hiro existed in her database, which made Mei even more curious about who Hiro really was. Hearing this, Hiro felt a little anxious, but he also couldn't deny that for him, the situation felt quite natural. However, it was probably worse for a mechanical intelligence like Mei, as he felt he couldn't explain it thoroughly. Hiro wondered whether he should tell Mei or not, but before he could decide, Mei reassured him that his secret would be safe with her. Although Hiro still felt that telling her was probably very risky for her to reach her full potential, the information they shared needed to be as accurate as possible. In the end, Hiro decided to explain everything to her, saying that from his perspective, this was all a game he used to play, and to make things more complicated, it wasn't exactly the same. Mei speculated that all of this might just be a simulation, and they could assume that this universe was a simulation created by a powerful supercomputer. And everyone in this natural phenomenon were virtual images created by someone. Although this theory sounded terrifying, it actually aligned with many things about their current situation. However, for Hiro, an imaginary universe didn't really feel right to him, not to mention that the level of technology in his world was far inferior to what Mei described. There weren't any computers like that here, as it was beyond the capabilities of even supercomputers. But if they were really considering a simulation like Mei said, then perhaps the opposite was true. This is reality, and Hiro's world was an artificial universe created somewhere within this reality. So, if he was given a physical form and jumped out of that world, why would he know nothing about it? However, in any case, they wouldn't know anything unless they found a way to prove that theory. If Hiro was being honest about it, he felt it was a waste of time to have to think about his origins. So he didn't dwell on his past, trying to convince Mei not to dig any deeper into the matter. It seemed his plan worked because after talking for a while, Mei quickly respected his decision and didn't continue to probe any further. The next day, it seemed Serena was starting to get bored because it had been 3 days since Hiro and his team took the escort mission, and not a single pirate had come near them. She blamed Hiro for it. Serena didn't even consider the possibility that her warship was the cause, even though the pirate ships could detect its presence. Confidently, Serena went on to say that was impossible because she had changed the ship's ID the day before. However, Elma found it absurd that she could say that so nonchalantly since ships have unique IDs, which means no two ships have the same ID, and they obviously can't be changed that easily. However, instead of accepting the fact that the fault might be theirs, Serena still refused to admit it. It turned out she was simply bored because if there were no pirates to catch, that just meant more people had to work for her. So she was really just stuck in the captain's office all this time. And she was hoping Hiro would at least help her escape this situation so she could get a breather. Hearing this, she seemed like a lonely person. As Serena skimmed through a report on pirate encounter rates throughout the Sierra Star system, she found that the incidents had dropped sharply since the large-scale attack, just when they were starting to think the day would pass peacefully. Just like the days before, the transport ship's limited response alarm went off, announcing that the pirates had finally arrived after 3 days. Immediately, everyone started moving to their stations and doing their jobs. With Hiro leading the charge, the team switched the radar mode to short range, and Hiro was put in contact with Pelican 4. Hiro quickly analyzed that the enemy would likely attack right after returning to normal space, so he left the defense systems to Elma. While checking on Pelican 4, Hiro noticed that the other group wasn't aware of the situation regarding the interceptor ship, and they felt it would be quite difficult to escape the enemy with their vessel. For this reason, Hiro quickly reminded them not to resist too strongly and to stop using their hyperdrive, as this would make it easier for him and his team to time their counterattack. So, for now, he asked Pelican 4 to focus on defense as much as possible once they entered normal space. Although Pelican 4 was a civilian vessel, its crew were all Imperial military personnel, so Hiro was confident they could at least save themselves. And even if the ship were destroyed, they could still use their Imperial-issue power armor and heavy weaponry. As Pelican 4 began to decelerate, Mimi suddenly realized there were a total of 11 enemy ships. Among them, 1 was a battleship and 2 were cruisers. It seemed like they had something planned, and it wasn't just simple piracy. Hiro wondered if they might have run into a major pirate fleet, but the bigger question was how these guys had managed to detect them. With such a large enemy force, if the team didn't accelerate immediately, they'd be in serious trouble. So, to make the most of this opportunity, Hiro ordered everyone that as soon as they entered normal space, they needed to accelerate as fast as possible. And the crew did exactly as instructed. However, it seemed the pirates weren't showing any mercy this time. Besides being numerous, they were also quick to open fire without warning. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Upon looking closer at the ships, they were stunned to discover they were old models from the Imperial military. At this point, it was easy to conclude that the Imperial military was actually quite lax in managing its equipment, and the enemy wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. This made it clear that these attackers weren't just space pirates, but that this was Balthazar's doing, and his target was Christina. Before they could even realize what was happening, the enemy battleship's main cannon began firing at them. And Hiro was aware that not even the Krishna shield would hold against it, as they were facing an Imperial fleet. Elma excitedly asked Hiro what their plan was now. It seemed Hiro was very excited, and decided to attack without hesitation. Amidst the fierce barrage, everyone on the ship began to brace for a possible impact. While everyone else was worried for their lives, Hiro was completely focused, thinking that keeping their distance from a large enemy was a rather absurd idea because to Hiro, the farther away they were, the more vulnerable they were to the enemy's powerful laser beams. Although the Krishna shield was strong, it couldn't block those large caliber lasers forever. So first they needed to get closer to prevent the enemy battleship from using its main cannon, and then Hiro planned to bombard the enemy ship with anti-battleship reaction torpedoes. After some maneuvering, they finally latched onto the enemy battleship's blind spot, just as planned. However, instead of attacking right away, Hiro decided to wait a bit, because this warship wasn't the only enemy they had to deal with. Even though the opponent was a large warship, they still needed to consider the cannons of the other ships. If they focused only on the warship's blind spot, the other ships wouldn't be able to fire their main cannons, and the enemy's escort fleet couldn't fire either for fear of hitting their own ship. Hiro planned to use his own ship's hull as a hostage, because fighting a fleet of warships is extremely difficult. They needed to think outside the box as much as possible. As the smaller ships began to move around them, just as predicted, Hiro proceeded to the next step. For Krishna and Hiro, this type of enemy was easier to deal with, and to make the situation even more dramatic, it seemed the enemy ships were sharing the same frequency as the Krishna. This meant they were just ordinary Imperial soldiers. This implied that not only was their equipment management lax, but they were indeed Imperial soldiers. There were many possible explanations for why this was happening. One of them was that Christina's grandfather might have bribed them, and now Serena's fleet had entered the fray. Using the communication frequency, Serena warned the engaged Imperial warships that their actions were suspected of being in serious violation of military law. Therefore, if they did not cease and desist and shut down their engines, they would be punished mercilessly under the law. However, despite that warning, it seemed none of the ships showed any sign of stopping or obeying Serena's command. So, Serena once again reminded them all that their actions were in serious violation of Imperial and military law, and if they refused to comply, Serena's fleet would be forced to shoot them down. But despite Serena's repeated warnings, the enemy seemed uninterested in the transport ship. It was clear their real target was Christina. Although Christina didn't know what methods her uncle had used to get them to join this battle, it was clear they couldn't back down. The enemy was even willing to damage their own ships, and had all weapons active, proving they had no hesitation about friendly fire. When heat signatures were detected, including from cruisers and destroyers, the battle grew even more intense. Serena ordered her fleet to designate the enemy as a rogue fleet, and requested that Hiro leave the area immediately. As they began to retreat, the enemy attacked them with a laser beam, but fortunately the Krishna was able to evade it expertly. As the ship's captain, Hiro tried to remain calm and reassure the crew, hoping to prevent any panic, even though the situation was spiraling out of control. Still, Hiro continued to assure everyone that everything was fine, and that it was all going according to plan. Meanwhile, Serena's attack grew more intense, and they needed to get out of the area before taking a direct hit. Luckily, they managed to escape in time. According to Elma's analysis, only one enemy ship was still fully operational. But was it okay for them to just hide? Hiro quickly said there was no need to put themselves in danger in this situation. Serena was here so she could handle it herself. But would this battle ever end, and who would be the victor? As the enemy ship began to comply, the Vester's engines slowly shut down. The ship's first mate, Lieutenant Roman Kestrel, also contacted Serena directly. Since he was the first mate, Serena wondered what had happened to their captain. According to Lieutenant Roman, their captain had harmed himself, and he had subsequently taken command. After hearing this, Serena announced that they would begin rescuing survivors, so the ship needed to prepare to receive them. Meanwhile, it seemed Hiro and his group found this information rather suspicious. However, since the situation had calmed down, the group concluded that the battle was probably over. So once things stabilized on Serena's end, they would return to Pelican 4. Mimi then checked on Christina, who was now quite calm compared to before. However, she honestly admitted that she had been very worried earlier. Hiro hoped that this was true. When the battle finally came to an end, Hiro and the others took the rebel team to the Sierra Prime colony. The independent anti-space pirate squad had paperwork and resupplying to do, so they were released from their duties. As for the reward, since there were no space pirates, Hiro and his group didn't get much, but they still managed to bring home around 240,000 Enel for 3 days of work, and that was it. Besides that, they also realized that Christina's grandfather might contact them at any time, so they decided to stay in the Sierra Prime colony. Hiro thought this might be a good time to upgrade May. For that reason, Hiro and May were on their way to the Orient Industry branch office. As soon as they arrived, Hiro started to feel unusually anxious. Based on the story he'd heard from Miro about the origin of mechanical intelligence, androids might consider this their birthplace, making this place a homeland for robots like May. However, the more he looked at everyone, the more intimidating this place seemed. Seeing Hiro's worried expression, May immediately asked if he was okay. Instantly, Hiro reassured her that there was nothing to worry about, keeping his thoughts to himself. After walking for a while, they reached the end of the area, where a large building greeted them. It turned out this was Orient Industry, the largest manufacturer in the Sierra Star system, and the two of them were about to enter the building. A girl greeted them warmly. Even at the reception desk, the receptionist was an android. What surprised Hiro was that the receptionist seemed to already know why they were here. Possibly because May had transmitted the data for their request while she was being checked in for the upgrade. Hiro waited in the reception area, but before he did, he asked the receptionist how long this upgrade would take. According to her, in May's case, it wasn't really an upgrade, but rather a body transfer process, so it wouldn't take too long. A body transfer is when the studio performs partial maintenance, like changing muscle fibers or repairing worn joints. This type of light maintenance helps upgrade the bodies currently in use. However, in this case, they would be replacing everything, from the skeletal structure to the muscle fibers and even the central microprocessors. For cases like that, it's easier to just transfer the data to a new body. So it's basically like upgrading a computer, and it would take about 2 hours at most. While May was undergoing the transfer, the receptionist kept Hiro occupied and offered some advice on how to live with robots like May, as well as things to remember when maintaining such robots. And before he knew it, his Enel had taken a serious hit without him even realizing. Finally, May was done, and although she didn't look any different on the outside, the receptionist assured him that May had become much stronger internally and was now more powerful. She was stronger than the average combat robot, and on top of that, it seemed May had been equipped with some items that could be used in combat, including a grenade-like object and a rather powerful security baton. However, besides these things, it seemed that as per the customization request, Hiro needed to conduct the operational test with May himself. This meant they had to do something rather unexpected. After the test, Hiro felt a bit embarrassed, but he couldn't deny that the experience with May was so impressive that he couldn't describe the feeling. Even so, since this wasn't Hiro's goal when he bought May, he felt as if he had paid to free May from slavery just so he could do whatever he wanted with her, which made him feel even more guilty. On top of that, he had also brought May to meet Mimi and Elma, which made his heart feel even heavier. To make matters worse, when they returned to the Krishna, an unfortunate incident was waiting for Hiro. It turned out some soldiers had come aboard the ship and were forcibly escorting Hiro into their vehicle, leaving him completely confused about what was happening. Hiro tried to explain everything to the soldiers, and while they were waiting for confirmation, May began to wonder who these soldiers were. Using her internal systems, May immediately discovered that these men were soldiers of Count Darenwald. They had been sent here to protect Christina. Actually, the Count had already contacted the group, but Hiro hadn't received the message because it arrived while May was being modified. When Hiro checked the message, it seemed May was right. After a while, once they received confirmation, the last of the soldiers finally allowed them to pass. Since Elma knew about the message and chose not to deliver it, Hiro guessed that she might have known he and May were doing something a little steamy. Although he didn't think this could be resolved with just a few words, Hiro decided to just let things be and not apologize to Elma. At least that's what he planned to do, but as soon as he entered the room and saw Elma waiting patiently for them in the kitchen, Hiro immediately got down on his knees and apologized to her for his incompetence. Even May apologized and asked Elma if she was really not angry about what had happened between her and Hiro. Elma immediately reassured her that she had no problem with May at all, but she still wanted Hiro to reflect a little on what had happened. As the tension gradually dissipated, Hiro suddenly noticed Christina and Mimi looking sad, hugging each other. He began to wonder what had happened to the two of them. Elma quickly explained that since they were now receiving communications from the Count, it meant that Christina would soon be returning to him. With the two of them having shared a room and been together for so long, Elma said that it would be very difficult for them to part ways. Elma also mentioned that the Count had informed them he wanted to see Christina as soon as possible, and hoped she would be kept safe. The message was sent through the guild, and the clerk had already confirmed Christina's safety, so everything should be fine. However, since Hiro was always the one in charge, the final decision was still his to make. With that information, the group immediately got to work, preparing to set off for the meeting. Hiro and his group were asked to travel in an armored vehicle, which was perfectly reasonable to ensure Christina's safety. However, they didn't expect the Count to ask them to come along, as they really thought he would just send someone else to get her. Elma then suggested that perhaps the Count didn't want their first meeting to be just through a message. Whatever the reason may be, Christina just hoped this wasn't a trap from her uncle. While they were talking, they finally arrived at the base where Christina's grandfather's ship was waiting. Looking at the enormous size and power of the ship, Hiro concluded that Christina's grandfather was definitely a Count, which also meant he would be very cautious with outsiders. As soon as they landed, a long line of maids and a butler greeted them warmly, overjoyed at the return of their master's granddaughter. The butler immediately said he would take Christina to see her grandfather, while Hiro and his group were to wait in the reception room. Although he was very worried about letting Christina go alone, Hiro hesitated a bit, but when Christina gave him a reassuring look, Hiro finally let the butler take her away. While his group continued to wait in the reception room, Mimi looked around, quite surprised and impressed to see that the inside of the ship didn't look like a ship at all. It felt like a 5-star hotel or a mansion, with a holographic garden they could look out on while enjoying their tea. Elma went on to explain that this was a warship from the Count's private fleet, but it was understandable that it also served as a vacation home and guest house, which was probably why there were so many maids and butlers here. Thinking about this made Hiro wonder if it was possible to turn the Krishna into a place like this. However, before he could even start thinking about doing something like that, Elma spoke up, saying it wasn't necessary, since the Krishna was already perfectly livable. From the automated cooking equipment to the systems the ship possessed, the Krishna was certainly a vessel that could rival high-class places like this one. Besides, they had a maid droid, so there was no need to upgrade it into such a lavish place. Realizing that Elma had a good point, Hiro dismissed his initial thought. However, if they considered the ship as a living space, a larger ship would be more comfortable to live in than the Krishna. Of course, it wouldn't be cheap, but it was still much cheaper than buying high-class citizenship in the Empire, as well as buying land and building a house on a planet. Moreover, it would increase his mobility and also open up more opportunities to earn money from jobs. That's why Hiro was considering buying a mothership. Besides that, the Krishna had been starting to feel cramped lately. It wasn't that he planned to add more people to the team, but having a larger ship would make more sense at this point in time. After a short conversation, a maid entered the room, announcing that Count Abraham Darenwald was on his way to meet the group. Immediately, Hiro and his crew showed their respect. Even though the Count might have already known who Hiro was, he still introduced himself as the captain from the mercenary guild. He then informed the Count that he wasn't accustomed to proper etiquette and asked to be excused for any surprising lapses in his manners. The Count went on to assure Hiro that he didn't need to be so formal. His very presence made Hiro tremble. His dignified demeanor seemed to assert his noble status. After being invited to sit, Hiro and his group felt more at ease. To their surprise, the Count immediately thanked them for doing a wonderful job protecting and ensuring Christina's safety. As the head of the Darenwald family and Christina's grandfather, he expressed his personal gratitude. Hiro, with his straightforward personality, didn't hesitate to say that the job was anything but easy. The Count was curious to know what had happened, And although Elma thought this was disrespectful to the Count, Hiro went on to recount everything his group had been through to get here, from unexpected adventures to battles with space pirates. Since Hiro's story didn't contradict what Christina had said, the Count promised to give the group a fitting reward, including covering all necessary expenses. This promise made Hiro very happy. He had spent a lot of money on this. Now that Christina was with them, Elma asked Count Darenwald what he planned to do next. After careful consideration, he wanted Hiro and his crew to continue the protection detail. Although he had bought all the combat power he could muster, their opponent was a fleet from the regular army, something he didn't take lightly. Besides, he saw no reason why mercenaries would refuse when there was a handsome reward. Without hesitation, Hiro immediately seized the opportunity and declared that they would take the job no matter what. After the short meeting, as they returned to the ship, Hiro couldn't help but feel excited about what was to come. Since he had spent quite a lot of enel at that resort, Count Darenwald's offer to fully reimburse him made him even happier. On top of that, receiving an 8 million enel reward for protecting Christina made him ecstatic. After deducting all the expenses, he had about 24.4 million left. Buying a mothership no longer seemed so far-fetched. In addition, they would also be receiving about 250,000 enel per day for the next escort mission. However, this reward amount seemed rather suspicious, as the daily rate was usually only around 80,000. Elma explained that this sum included hush money, because this incident was a scandal that could bring down the Darenwald family. The Count was essentially asking Hiro not to reveal anything about it. As he thought about this, Hiro suddenly realized he had already told Serena about the incident. He also wondered about the Imperial Army's involvement, since deserters would also be a huge scandal. Elma went on to explain that they were actually being played by both the Count and the army, as both sides wanted to settle this between themselves. If this news were to get out, Hiro could end up being an enemy to not just the Count, but the Imperial Army as well. So he had no choice but to keep his mouth shut. When they finally returned to the Krishna, Hiro and the girls went to rest. After changing and relaxing for a bit, Hiro suddenly felt bored. Mimi and Elma went shopping. They'd been on the Krishna for a while and needed a break. Things were also safer around them thanks to the Count, but May still went with them just in case. This left Hiro on the Krishna with nothing to do, and for some reason he felt like he couldn't function properly without the girls. While he was lost in thought, the doorbell suddenly rang. Hiro wondered who would be visiting the Krishna unannounced. He checked the security camera, and to his surprise, it was none other than Serena. It seemed Serena was on vacation and feeling bored, so she decided to pay them a visit. Since Hiro didn't want to deal with her, he tried to tell her to go rest with her subordinates, even calling her a loner. But before Hiro could realize it, Serena started to cry, and in the end, Hiro finally decided to let Serena in. Seeing her act like that made Hiro feel bad for turning her away earlier. Since he was feeling bored anyway, he decided to spend some time with her, seeing as there was nothing else to do. However, he thought it wasn't right for the officer to come aboard the ship just for him, so Hiro decided to take her out for a walk around the Empire. Once they were outside, Hiro suggested they take a stroll down the colony's main street. Since Serena wasn't familiar with the term stroll, Hiro explained that it simply meant walking around without a specific purpose, looking for something interesting. Since this was an area with many tourist attractions, they were sure to find something fun for Serena. After wandering around for a while, they decided to go into a VR station, which also got Hiro pretty excited. Originally, VR stations were designed to serve people who were waiting to go down to resort planets, or those who couldn't go for some reason. They could use the VR devices to at least feel like they were enjoying a vacation. But nowadays, because so many people are interested in advanced VR, the VR industry has become a major tourist attraction itself. However, Serena felt that this might not be a good idea for them. Hiro was confused and didn't understand what Serena meant. He tried to ask her what she was getting at, and Serena replied that going outside only to lock yourself up in a VR space was ridiculous. Hiro realized that she didn't like VR at all. Instead, Serena suggested they visit a restaurant. She explained that the Sierra Star system was a top-tier, galaxy-scale resort, with delicious food and drinks from all over the galaxy, even from outside the Empire. The place was highly rated, especially for its drinks, meaning anyone could enjoy a wide variety of beverages. However, Hiro wasn't keen on the idea, afraid that Serena would get completely drunk. As they started arguing in public, a group of rather suspicious-looking men approached them. They stared at Serena, leering at her in an unwelcome way. The men said they might have just hit the jackpot, implying they had bad intentions and would probably try to take advantage of her in ways Hiro found hard to imagine. Model. Especially knowing that Serena was no ordinary woman. Hiro warned the two men that he wouldn't recommend they lay a hand on her, and as a result, this angered the two thugs so much that one of them suddenly lunged at Hiro, since this guy was tugging at his own clothes. Even though Hiro wasn't the best at communicating, he couldn't just stand there and not teach them a lesson. However, before he could act, Serena made the first move. Upon seeing Serena's sword, both men panicked. And I didn't even have to do much. They just ran off like cowards. Once they realized Serena was a noble, they scrambled away in fear. It seems the commoners in this world are truly terrified of the aristocracy, which is a sad state of affairs. But let's put that aside for now, model, because other, more dangerous people might approach them. In the end, both Hiro and Serena decided to head to a restaurant. As they were having dinner, Serena couldn't hide her delight. She was so happy because the food was absolutely delicious, while Hiro, meanwhile, sent a distress signal to Mimi and Elma just in case. It seemed he couldn't handle Serena on his own if she got too drunk. Although he tried to be discreet, Serena still noticed. Hiro immediately explained that he did it to ensure they were both safe. Because of this, Serena told him she'd thought he was always being cold to her, as if he were putting up a wall between them. She suggested it would be nice if Hiro could open up to her more. Without hesitation, Hiro replied that he felt it would only be a nuisance. He explained that as a lieutenant in the Imperial fleet and the daughter of a duke, Serena needed to keep her distance from him. Moreover, Hiro felt she didn't need to concern herself with him, since she could surely find a fiancé, someone worthy of a person like her, a duke's daughter. Despite hearing this from Hiro, Serena felt a little sad, but she eventually accepted that this was his true intention. Serena was just worried she would end up living alone when she got older. To comfort her a little, Hiro reassured her that wouldn't happen to someone of noble lineage. He was sure that other nobles had probably introduced her to potential candidates. Even so, Serena felt she hadn't met anyone who truly fit what she wanted in a partner. The last person she met was so spoiled he'd never even held a sword, let alone a gun. There was another who she found too weak, unable to beat her in a sword fight despite being very muscular. There were even some who were skilled swordsmen but had terrible personalities, willing to cut down commoners as if it were nothing. Based on Serena's laments, Hiro concluded that while these men might not be ideal, they definitely weren't to her taste. But even he himself wasn't the type of man she was looking for. Although he could use a gun, swords were a different story. However, Serena had to admit that she was quite surprised Hiro knew how to use a sword, since he wasn't a noble. On top of that, Serena had also fallen for Hiro's bravery and courage. He had slashed through a horde of strange creatures in a suit of combat armor, developed a new strategy, flew into a Federation fleet all by himself, and showed the talent and skill to pull everything off perfectly, even though he was an outsider. He had reorganized the independent anti-piracy fleet and had a great tactical eye for building an effective battle plan against the pirates. Because of all this, Serena felt that these qualities of Hiro's far outweighed his swordsmanship. Hearing all of this, Hiro almost wanted to puke, as he didn't really expect Serena to think so highly of him. However, since he wanted to be completely blunt with her, Hiro immediately said that he didn't think this would work out at all. Even if they loved each other, Serena was a noble and he was just a commoner, a fact he was well aware of. Serena suggested that this wouldn't be a big problem, because Hiro could get promoted to at least platinum rank and everything would be fine. If he could achieve the gold star, it would be even better. This was the first time Hiro had ever heard of the gold star. Serena went on to explain that the gold star was the common name for the first-class Star Cross medal. Only those who achieved outstanding military accomplishments for the Empire were awarded it. In fact, it was the highest honor a soldier could receive. It was a limited award, but its recipients were treated as an equal to a marquis and given a corresponding position. She felt that Hiro could somehow earn this medal. However, it seemed to Hiro that even if he could win the gold star, dating Serena was another matter entirely. This obviously made Serena even angrier. The lesson here, though, is that you can't force someone to love you. After the forced date between Hiro and Serena, they both finally returned home and started working on their own tasks on the way to their next mission. Mimi reported to Hiro that the fleet had received permission to depart. And since they were the escort, they needed to ensure all their movements were synchronized and not break formation at any time. She also reported that it had been 3 days since they handed Christina over to the Count, and they were finally about to leave Sierra Prime. Hiro had to endure the incident with the intruder, but now everything was ready for the journey, including setting up the maintenance bay for May. It seems Hiro and his crew were doing a pretty good job, as they were hired for another task. Now they had to escort the fleet carrying the Count and Christina. Still, most of the fleet was armed on par with the military, so it was likely that Krishna wouldn't have much to do. Their destination was the capital star system, called Duxer. Hiro anticipated that the journey there would be very long, so they would have to use a few FTL ships and warp gates. All Hiro hoped for was that no one would attack, so he could make a clear profit from this job, since 250,000 NL per day was an incredible amount of money. Elma, on the other hand, had a feeling that the Count was doing this to show off, but there was no denying that if news leaked of a high-ranking noble hiring a mid-tier gold-ranked crew at the normal market rate, it would certainly attract major attention. People would start saying the house was on the decline. As someone who knew a lot about these things, Elma was sure that it wasn't just nobles who did this, but merchants as well. Usually, merchants would pay 1.5 times the market price, while nobles paid double. This was called the trend. Mimi was shocked to hear this, as she never expected this was how rich people spent their money. The amount was so large that it didn't feel real to her anymore. However, Elma felt that what Mimi said was silly, since she also earned a lot of money from a normal person's perspective. Feeling embarrassed by what Elma just said, the awkward atmosphere was broken when May announced that they had received a synchronization request. Immediately, Mimi set up synchronization mode with the Count's fleet and the FTL and hyperdrive systems. After that, Hiro started to relax a little, thinking they could finally leave the rest of the work to the fleet. In the midst of this, they encountered a warp gate that was larger than usual. Hiro finally concluded that they were truly very different from what he had seen in the game, both in size and shape. In truth, this wasn't the first difference he'd noticed between this world and Seoul, but it was a really big one. This made him start to find it difficult to estimate distances in space. Just comparing it to a single colony was enough to see how massive it was. The docked Imperial ships looked like grains of rice, and right in the middle was the actual warp gate, which warped time and space to connect across the cosmos. It was said to be a combination of the best technologies the Empire had to offer. However, Hiro didn't understand how it worked, but he figured that no matter how they explained it, he wouldn't be able to understand. So, for now, he just had to let it go. On the other hand, Mimi realized that the enemy hadn't attacked them on the way to the gate, which made her wonder if they were waiting to ambush them on the other side. Considering this possibility, Hiro thought that an attack on the other side was quite possible in this situation, but he doubted they would attack near the warp gate's exit. Mimi was confused, and Elma explained that a warp gate can move ships across thousands or even tens of thousands of light years, making it one of the most important facilities in the entire Empire. In short, if someone were to destroy or capture it, it would cause unimaginable damage to the Empire, not just in terms of logistics, but also in its strategic position. That meant the defense force here had to be on a completely different level. Therefore, they would need an immense amount of firepower to be able to fight off an enemy. Even the Krishna would be turned to ash in a second. This meant that when they passed through the warp gate, the path ahead would be very dangerous. The Nipuk and Melkit star systems are both under the Empire's direct control. Kumat and their destination, Duxer, are territory of the Count's family, which means the big problems will come from Ziegel and Wellick. If the Count has a good relationship with the nobles there, they might provide him with an escort. However, even if they were to officially ask the Count, he certainly wouldn't easily disclose private matters between nobles. With this, Hiro asked for May's opinion on the matter. According to her, she thought the most likely time for an attack would be after they exit the Kumat star system. Obviously, Count Dureinwald's defeat would be a huge blow to the Lord, but it was also the homeland of his son, Balthazar. Based on what had happened before, May could guess that although his specific course of action was still unclear, she believed Balthazar was skilled at manipulating others. With this, there was a high probability that he would gather his forces in Count Dureinwald's territory, where he could easily exert his authority. Therefore, the chances of them waiting to ambush the team after they passed through the Kumat star system via hyperspace were very high. At the very least, May had come to the conclusion that This was highly likely since they had, after all, attacked their squad with forces beyond their expectations. She was also certain that Balthazar was pulling every trick in the book to put their team in a difficult position. After hearing this, Hiro asked Elma for her opinion on whether they should inform the Count. After a moment of thought, Elma wasn't so sure, as this was tantamount to accusing a territory of disloyalty, which Hiro felt was somewhat reasonable, especially since the Count's son had already betrayed him. Even so, to Elma, he was still a nobleman, and with such a high position, he certainly wouldn't want his honor tarnished by mere outsiders. This, in turn, gave Hiro more to think about. But for now, Hiro and the girls decided to relax and enjoy the time they had left while they still could, by playing an online game. Mimi reassured Christina, who is currently on the mothership, that there was no need to worry about any attacks, as Hiro would handle everything. However, being the blunt one, Elma shattered their hopes by saying that Hiro wasn't invincible either. Despite knowing that, Mimi always trusted in Hiro's abilities no matter what. With that, they were currently relaxing, traveling through a hyperspace lane, on autopilot, so unless they were attacked, the team had nothing to do. And what better way to kill time than by playing mahjong? As for why mahjong even existed in this world, that surprised even Hiro. While Christina was on the Count's ship, May and Hiro stayed in the cockpit, just in case someone launched a surprise attack. To kill time, they decided to play a few rounds of an online game. This was Mimi's first time playing this game, and the other girls couldn't believe how good she was. Especially since Mimi was in the lead, while Elma was at the bottom of the scoreboard. This made Elma quite frustrated. Right now, Hiro couldn't deny that Mimi's strategy was truly bizarre, but somehow her risky plays worked out, and she even managed to draw a thin sumo. Meanwhile, Elma's strategy was quite solid. However, Elma kept getting bad tiles, causing her to lose continuously. The sight of the two of them facing off was like a battle between great luck and terrible misfortune, and it was clearly amusing Hiro a great deal. Besides that, despite passing through the space gates, they weren't attacked at either Zeegle or Wellick. Now, as they prepared to warp out of the Kumat star system, it seemed May's prediction was correct. The enemy would attack right after they left. According to Mimi, since the Count already knew about the whole scheme, they felt like they had nowhere else to go, no matter how hard they tried. It's precisely because there is no way back. May further explained that Balthazar was desperate, because in his current situation he couldn't escape his own destruction. But with the ambition he had shown, it was unlikely he would flee or seek asylum. That's why from his point of view, if the Count and Lady Christina were dead, he could use force to seize the headship of the family because that was the only option he had left. He was surely planning to sort everything out after inheriting the title. So if the enemy did attack, they had to be ready to face whatever they threw at them. Because now there was no turning back. The only plan Hiro had now was to keep himself and his team flexible and adapt to the situation. To be blunt, this meant they had no concrete plan at all. The moment they warped out of hyperspace, Hiro immediately noticed that every ship in the fleet was on high alert, which meant they were surrounded by the enemy. However, these unidentified ships looked just like ordinary warships. Although the fleet tried to contact them through wide-area communication channels, they got no response. On top of that, these ships were just circling around without attacking. This strongly suggested that the enemy was just trying to hold them in this area, waiting for something to happen. Just seconds later, Mimi's radar detected something approaching their position at extreme speed from outside the radar's range. Based on its trajectory, it seemed the target was heading straight for the Count's ship. This was probably why the enemy was trying to stall for time. Without hesitation, Hiro and his team immediately activated their engines at full power and accelerated. When the target appeared on the screen, the whole team was stunned to see its rather strange shape. Long and slender. Even Hiro, who had spent a lot of time in Seoul, had never seen a ship like it. However, Hiro believed that Krishna's lasers could take care of this target. But as they began to open fire, it seemed the enemy ship's shields were too strong. Despite their best efforts to inflict damage, it was all in vain. Meanwhile, the target continued to accelerate. Even with Krishna moving at maximum speed, they couldn't keep up with it. It seemed they still couldn't catch the strange ship. What was worse was that the strange ship had pierced straight through the Count's vessel. Hiro immediately requested a report as he checked the parameters on his screen. But strangely enough, there were no changes in thermal energy or phase, even after the ship collided, making Hiro wonder, Does this mean it's not self-destructing? Meanwhile, Elma ran some more checks and noticed the other ships seemed to be just holding their positions, not taking any aggressive action. This confused Hiro even more. What is that ship actually trying to do? According to May's assessment, it was most likely a suppression ship. This type of ship is designed to pierce a target's hull with a collision horn. After ramming, it uses conduits to flood the target with soldiers and take control from the inside. These ships are equipped with extremely powerful shields, high-output propulsion systems, and saturated shield protectors. However, they aren't equipped with any weapons, with all their power focused on infiltration and suppression. Still, no matter how May explained it, it seemed Hiro couldn't quite grasp the full situation. Until now, he'd always thought Balthazar simply wanted to kill the Count and Christina. If that's the case, Hiro wondered, why go to all the trouble of infiltrating their ship? Just planting a reaction bomb would get the job done. But as Elma thought it over, she realized it wasn't entirely out of the question. The nobles of the Empire place great importance on swordsmanship. This could mean Balthazar himself is on that ship. And as an Imperial noble, he wants to settle this with a sword. Now, things were starting to make a bit more sense. Even so, Hiro still couldn't understand the values and perspectives of the nobles in this world. But looking at the bigger picture, if Balthazar didn't settle things with a sword, it could damage the unity of the forces backing him. With all that considered, Hiro wondered, so what should we do about this strange ship now? According to May, since the ship was directly connected to the Count's vessel, there were numerous dangers to consider, including the possibility of an explosion. This led to only one option. They had to storm the ship and face the enemy in close-quarters combat. Although May admitted it was an extremely risky move, it seemed they had no other choice. Hiro couldn't just sit back and do nothing while the Count and the others were fighting for their lives. Besides, if the Count mistook him for an enemy and shot him, that would just increase his reward. But more important than anything, he had to save Christina from danger at all costs. With that in mind, Elma and Mimi were tasked with staying with the Krishna while Hiro took May with him. As soon as they set foot on the Count's ship, Hiro was taken aback by how quiet it was, so much so that it didn't feel like they were in the middle of a battle at all. But even so, they had to move carefully to avoid drawing any attention that could lead to the enemy discovering them. However, it seemed that moving stealthily was going to be quite a challenge, especially with the upgraded May. While her ability to wield power armor weaponry was impressive, it drew far too much attention. From a physics standpoint, it seemed impossible, but it must have been some kind of mysterious technology. So, Hiro tried not to dwell on it for the time being. Additionally, his own power armor was designed with heavy plating and strong firepower, so he hoped he could handle any standard close-quarters fights without May's support. However, before he left, Elma had reminded him to always be on his guard and avoid getting hit by a noble's sword, because otherwise he'd be cut down, as his armor was like tofu against a noble's blade. On top of that, a noble's sword could even deflect laser beams, so Hiro needed to be especially careful not to get hit by a ricochet. On the way to the main hall, Hiro asked May whether this type of ramming tactic ship was common in this world. According to May, that didn't seem to be the case. Some amateurs had built this type of vessel through connections, but not many were made and they were rarely used. The success rate for these ships was also very low. In the military, this type of ship was commonly known as an expensive coffin, and yet Balthazar had successfully pulled off this tactic. And if it weren't for Hiro, someone like him would have likely gotten away with as many schemes. That's why on this mission, Hiro needed to maintain maximum focus, because this would be his only chance to ensure everyone's safety no matter what. As they ventured deeper into the ship, Mimi reported that there was a firefight happening in the room to their left. The moment they stepped inside, Hiro was surprised to see the ship's crew, dressed as maids and butlers, a truly surreal sight for him. Even so, it didn't seem to be an unfamiliar sight for May. Now that they were here, the appearance of Hiro's power armor stunned the enemy, as they never expected someone to be equipped like that on the ship. However, as the situation could get bloodier from here, Hiro ordered the team to fall back, leaving him and May to handle the enemies themselves. As the battle began, though the enemies fired relentlessly, their primitive handheld weapons were completely unable to damage Hiro's modern power armor. Thanks to the armor's overwhelming power and defense, Hiro and May could have simply pushed forward if they wanted to. However, to their surprise, the enemy also possessed power armor. It appeared to be a medium-class model designed for military purposes. This made Hiro realize that the enemy had prioritized agility, perhaps to deal with fast-moving targets. However, in such a confined space, the enemy armor's mobility offered almost no advantage. Hiro's strength and defensive capabilities played a crucial role in gaining the upper hand in the fight. On top of that, Mei's precise marksmanship provided significant support, allowing them to easily push back the enemy. With just a little more effort, they could overcome all the foes in no time. As the two of them continued to fight their way from one enemy to the next, they quickly cleared out those in their way and advanced to the next room. At this point, Mimi informed them that the remaining enemies were concentrated in the large hall at the end of the corridor. Knowing that time was of the essence, Hiro had Mei go on ahead. He was surprised to find she was even faster than he'd expected. When the two of them finally reached the main hall, Hiro was stunned by the scene before him. Hiro witnessed a horrifying sight. It seemed many people had been killed in the battle, but not by laser weapons or explosions, but by the slashes of a sword. In that moment, Hiro began to wonder if this was truly the power of a noble's sword. The sight sent a chill down his spine, even while protected by his powerful armor. As Hiro scanned the area, he found a room where Christina and the others were. From the looks of it, Christina seemed to be all right, but the Count had suffered multiple injuries. Fortunately, his wounds didn't appear to be life-threatening. As he continued to observe, Hiro's gaze fell upon a man standing there with two swords in hand. There was no mistaking it. That was Balthazar de Reinwald. Immediately, Mei charged in to engage him. Hiro was completely taken aback by Balthazar's ability to effortlessly deflect the laser beams with just his sword. Although Balthazar's physical abilities had been enhanced with cybernetics, Hiro never expected him to be this strong. The fact that Balthazar could go head-to-head with Mei, even after she had been fully optimized, proved he was a far greater foe than Hiro had anticipated. However, that didn't mean they were going to give up. Even though his physical abilities were overwhelmingly enhanced, Hiro was quite certain he wouldn't be able to dodge Balthazar's next attack. However, he was mistaken to think so. As he prepared to fire a laser at Balthazar, the man easily sliced Hiro's laser gun in two. As the battle grew more intense, Hiro ordered Mei to switch her launcher to focus mode, determined to defeat Balthazar no matter what. He reasoned that if it was a mobile weapon, its battery capacity surely couldn't be that large. So their only option was to unleash a barrage of powerful lasers to destroy his shield. When they started firing with all their might, smoke began to cover the combat area. Hiro wondered if Balthazar was activating his self-destruct mode. However, according to Mei, this was just a smokescreen tactic to reduce the laser's effectiveness, meaning Balthazar just wanted to hide. So, instead of continuing to fire the laser, Hiro decided to throw the entire laser gun at Balthazar. And surprisingly, this plan worked. Balthazar stumbled and fell to the ground from Hiro's unexpected attack. As Hiro checked to see if Balthazar was down, he hoped this would be an opportunity for his opponent to stop. However, to everyone's surprise, Balthazar wasn't defeated at all. He was just faking it and immediately gripped his sword, ready to fight again. The whole group was worried for Hiro. The question was, could Hiro avoid this attack? Or would this be the end of his glorious life? In reality, not even a noble's sword like Balthazar's could penetrate Hiro's shield. In fact, Hiro's shield was so strong that he easily defeated Balthazar in an instant. However, Hiro couldn't deny that he'd thought for a moment that Balthazar's sword might actually cut through his shield. But thankfully, it didn't happen. After Balthazar was defeated, Hiro asked Count Darenwald what should be done with the man. The Count ordered his men to arrest Balthazar immediately, to prevent him from causing any more harm. In addition, the Count also offered Balthazar's sword to Hiro, since he was the one who defeated him. Although Hiro had no intention of accepting it, the Count kept insisting that Hiro should take it, since he had helped the Count solve the problem with his son. In the end, Hiro accepted the sword as the Count requested. With the leader of this force captured and all enemies aboard the ship apprehended, the surrounding warships had either been shot down or had surrendered. This attack had truly caused a great deal of damage, both to the assets and the lives of the Count's fleet. Therefore, the fleet needed repairs and supplies and would be stopping at a colony in the Kumat star system. Meanwhile, Hiro and his team would continue their guard duty, but in reality, the Krishna would be docked in the hangar of the Count's flagship. As for the crew, they were on standby, which meant they could do whatever they wanted. Because after a long, stressful day, they desperately needed some rest. Hiro was planning his well-deserved rest until Christina visited him with a sweet smile. She greeted him with a good evening. The moment he recognized her, Hiro immediately said he didn't think she'd be able to get away, considering how busy the fleet was. As they began to chat comfortably, Hiro shared his thoughts about Christina's grandfather. It seemed that this whole time, He felt that the Count was always scowling, as if he disliked Hiro interfering in his confrontation. Christina was fully aware that her grandfather always seemed displeased, but she also assured Hiro that the Count was actually very fond of him, and with her standing right there, he had no reason to doubt it. Hiro took this opportunity to give Christina one of her most precious possessions. Now that Balthazar has been captured, Hiro assured her that she would no longer be targeted, and that also meant his duty as her knight protector was over. Hearing this, Christina felt sad and anxious that she would never see Hiro again. Without hesitation, she confessed her feelings to Hiro, a love that was more than just friendship. As it turned out, Hiro had been aware of this for a long time. No matter the situation, he knew that to Christina, he was like a knight in shining armor who had come to rescue her. But Hiro understood that her feelings were just a temporary infatuation. However, to Christina, it was a very serious matter. Her confession took all of her courage, which made Hiro happy. However, he bluntly told her that he couldn't accept her feelings. This shocked Christina, as she didn't really expect Hiro to reject her. To avoid hurting her further, Hiro went on to explain that her life as a noblewoman was completely different from his life, a mercenary. Although loving someone shouldn't be based on their circumstances, Hiro was just being realistic about the situation. He made Christina realize that they were not meant to be together. However, it seemed Christina was so serious about him that she was willing to give up her noble title. Now that things had gotten serious, Hiro explained that she couldn't do that. She is the sole heir of the Darenwald family, and if she really gave up her title, who would carry on the legacy of her parents and ancestors? Furthermore, if she did that, the Count would surely come after him. For this reason, Hiro made her realize that he was only doing this out of concern for his own life, and couldn't choose a path that might put his loved ones in danger. Because of this, Christina couldn't hold back her emotions any longer. She burst into tears, afraid that everything would change between her and Hiro. Fortunately, May came to the rescue and comforted her. However, as soon as May and Christina left, Hiro also couldn't contain the mixed emotions in his heart. It seemed he felt guilty for not being skilled enough to comfort a girl. In the end, Hiro rejected Christina and pushed everything onto May, which made him feel guilty towards May and hate himself. Even so, by this point, Hiro felt that facing pirates was easier than dealing with girls confessing their feelings. Speaking of girls, Mimi suddenly entered his room and jumped right onto the bed. Confused about what was happening, Hiro asked Mimi what she was doing. At first, Mimi seemed to be okay when she looked at him, until she suddenly burst into tears. As it turned out, Mimi had heard about what happened between Hiro and Christina, and she couldn't control her emotions. Upon learning that Hiro had chosen her and Elma over Christina, Mimi explained that she was so happy he chose them, so happy that she started to cry. She had been worried that Hiro would replace them with Christina, but after hearing the news, Mimi couldn't help but feel relieved, even though she felt very sorry for Christina. However, when Mimi thought about it, she knew that Hiro must be feeling even worse than they were right now, so she tried to hold back her emotions. Although Hiro wasn't good at comforting others, he did his best to make Mimi feel better. After all, he understood how Mimi felt to some extent, because she had been friends with Christina from the very beginning. So it was clear Mimi couldn't forgive herself for feeling happy, even though Christina was the one who got hurt. But thanks to her, Hiro felt the gloomy feelings he had before start to fade away. Moreover, it seemed nothing made Mimi feel more at peace than being with Hiro like this. After their short talk, the two of them finally went to meet the others. Elma seemed much calmer than Mimi. It wasn't that Elma seemed indifferent, but rather that she knew there was no way the Count would have allowed Hiro to have a relationship with Christina in the first place. On top of that, she also understood that Christina didn't have time for that. This statement left Hiro a bit confused as he didn't really understand what Elma meant. Then, Elma continued, explaining that since Christina was the sole heir, if something were to happen to the current head of the family, her grandfather, it would be troublesome if an unprepared heir had to take over. This meant that the Count was obligated to prioritize Christina's education, which also meant she wouldn't be free to pursue romance, or things like that. Hearing this, Hiro felt a little sorry for Christina, but since it was her duty as a noble of the Empire, there wasn't much they could do about it. After all, with great power comes great responsibility. Now that the issue with Christina was resolved, it seemed Hiro's next problem was May. However, Elma reassured him that everything would be fine as long as nothing unexpected happened. Besides, the Empire's mechanical intelligences were all focused on the completion of romantic relationships. Or rather, they craved a happy ending, regardless of their personality settings. As they were talking quietly amongst themselves, May suddenly cut in, saying that for her, love and romance would save the universe. Hiro now remembered that May was a love addict. Realizing that she might have accidentally given Christina some strange advice, Hiro immediately asked May to confirm. May quickly explained that she hadn't given any weird advice. In fact, she had told Christina to strive in her studies, developing both her mind and body to achieve her full potential as the heir to Count Darrenwald. If she could do that, no one could object. If Christina wanted to take Hiro for herself, she looked at Hiro with a slight glimmer of hope in her eyes. Christina felt motivated to do better so that she could be with Hiro in the future. This obviously surprised Hiro, as he had no plans of becoming a noble himself. The next day, the group got back to work. While they were working, Elma was quite surprised to see Hiro's serious expression. Turns out he was thinking about the reward he was expecting and wondering if it was time to buy a mothership. Since Hiro brought it up, Elma was curious about which model he wanted to get. Hiro had narrowed down his choices. The first ship on his list was the Nighthawk. This model was designed with speed as its key feature, and it had the best maneuverability in its class. However, its durability, armor, and overall defense, as well as its cargo capacity, were lacking compared to other motherships. However, for Elma, this ship's beautifully aerodynamic design was a perfect fit, since it could outrun anyone if they were being chased. The second ship on Hiro's list was the Skid Bladnir. Compared to the Nighthawk, this ship focused on defense, so its durability was excellent, and its armor was very thick. It could hold a large amount of cargo, and its design allowed for a lot of customization. However, the heavy armor meant that its speed and overall handling would be significantly reduced. But for May, there was no doubt she could handle the mothership's speed or weaknesses. But would it be a good choice to bring out the Krishna's full potential? As they started debating which ship to choose, Elma insisted they should go with the Nighthawk, because for her, being able to run fast was crucial. Plus, its good evasion performance and the ability to make a quick retreat when needed were very appealing. However, May suggested choosing the Skid Bladnir for her, because expanding their cargo capacity should be the main factor when buying a mothership. The reason was that they couldn't fully rely on the Nighthawk. Besides, the Krishna could take off in most situations when entering a battle, so May believed they could use that ship for most combat scenarios. That's why she believed the mothership should prioritize defense over evasion or offense. If Hiro thought about it, May had a point. But from the team's safety perspective, the ability to retreat was also important. More importantly, Elma would be the one piloting the ship. This meant Hiro felt she wouldn't be a good fit for a slow ship. Now that Hiro mentioned it, May actually thought she would be the one piloting the mothership in the future, based on her explanation. Elma and Mimi were essential members of the Krishna, so by process of elimination, she thought she would be the one taking on the pilot role from now on. In terms of safety, they could take a bit of a risk if it was just an android like her on board. Even in the worst-case scenario where the mothership gets shot down, if she was the only one on board, it would still be manageable. So, after careful consideration, Hiro finally chose the Skid Bladnir. After the rather serious meeting about the mothership, the Count finally summoned them for a meeting. As soon as everyone was in position, the Count announced that he hadn't summoned them to pressure them in any way. All the Count wanted to tell them was his deep gratitude for what Hiro and his party had done for them the other day. The Count also went on to express his shame over the recent series of events. He was well aware that his son was an ambitious person, and as a Count, he felt he had acted like a senile old man for not realizing it. Without the help of Hiro and his party, the Count knew he could have lost Christina as well. That was why he was so incredibly grateful for the party's help. As the Count bowed his head, Hiro and the others couldn't believe their eyes because a real noble was actually bowing to them. In addition, the Count also brought some good news for the group. Since what they did was such a noble act, the Count decided to repay them. He wanted to make Hiro one of his knights. But unlike what Christina had said, the Count was aware that Hiro would definitely not accept this offer. Then, Hiro suggested that perhaps they could buy him a new mothership, as this would surely help him and his party a great deal. Hiro further explained that this ship would bring out the Krishna's full potential, and basically, it was the ship he really wanted to be able to earn more money. But because he said all of this directly to Christina, the Count felt a bit strange about Hiro. So he reminded him that he wouldn't ask him to be mindful of his circumstances, as he also had friends, with whom he could dispense with social formalities despite their different statuses. However, the Count was very serious when he told Hiro that he would not allow the kind of relationship Christina was hoping for. But since the Count knew Hiro already understood this, he decided not to bring it up again. As for the mothership, the Count told them he knew a shipbuilder in the nearby Brad star system. Since their party was also planning to head there, model. The Count gave Hiro the crest of the Darenwald family. This crest proves their support for Hiro, because the Darenwald family is involved in exporting mineral resources within the Brad star system. If Hiro carries this crest during negotiations, it will be very useful. Hiro was actually reconsidering whether or not he should accept this crest, as he felt it might bring him a lot of trouble. However, the Count quickly reassured Hiro, telling him not to worry about the thoughts swirling in his head, because this crest wouldn't restrict what he could do. As soon as he handed the crest to Hiro, the Count immediately excused himself, informing the group that he had to continue negotiations with the Imperial army. However, he gestured for the group and Christina to have a meal and relax a bit before he left. On his way out, the Count suddenly noticed Mimi, who reminded him of someone he had known before. Mimi quickly said that he was probably mistaken, though with a hint of anxiety, but it was a rather strange remark for the Count to make. Elma and Hiro didn't think much of it and just went on with their business. A few days later, Christina seemed to be trying to convince Hiro to stay a little longer. However, since everything was settled, there was no more work for a mercenary like Hiro and his crew. So Hiro decided to leave. Christina respected his decision and only asked him to visit her if he had time. Witnessing Christina's transformation from a timid princess into a brave noble respected by all, Hiro couldn't refuse her request. And so their ship finally departed. Christina remained alone, even though Hiro and his group had left. Even so, Christina felt grateful to have met them. To her, Hiro was never the type of person to stay in one place for long. He was like a bird flying freely through space, and she, a powerless girl, couldn't be the cage to hold him back. However, she hoped that in a few years, when she was strong enough to stand as his equal, she would try to become a place where he could find safety. Resolute and full of hope thanks to May's words, Christina looked toward the journey she was about to embark on until the day she and Hiro would meet again. After several days of travel, Hiro and his crew finally arrived at the Brad star system. As soon as they arrived, Hiro informed the group that they should head straight for the main shipyard. However, upon checking, it seemed they were being scanned. This scanning wasn't illegal. They weren't military or police, so the best the group could do was ignore them. These scanners weren't hiding their identities either. Although Hiro didn't feel particularly bad about it, being scanned like this wasn't a pleasant feeling at all. Still, since there were no signs of attack, Hiro decided to ignore them. That was until he noticed that more and more ships were beginning to scan them, and these ships even started to surround them. Although these vessels weren't directly harming the group, Elma couldn't deny that they made her feel uneasy. Left with no other choice, Hiro decided to speed up to get away from these strange ships. However, when they requested to land, even more ships began to scan them. After a check, May's analysis showed that these ships all belonged to the Spaced Dwerger Company. This left Elma confused, as the shipbuilder should have known they were coming. Based on May's analysis, it might be because the Krishna is a rare ship, and the Brad system is home to many curious people, so they'd definitely be interested in something new to them, like the Krishna. Still, there are just too many of them. The Brad system is very proactive in pursuing technology, and uses pirates as guinea pigs in what they call evaluation tests. It's gotten to the point where even the shipbuilders hunt pirates in this area. It's said that pirates usually stay away from the space around shipbuilders for this very reason. However, Hiro found this incredibly unpleasant. Even though it wasn't illegal, Hiro just felt it was a disrespectful act. But fortunately, it seemed they could still land safely. Just as they touched down, an android receptionist led them to a negotiation area inside. There, someone was in charge of building a ship for Hiro. When Hiro opened the door, he was quite surprised to see that the person he was meeting looked like a child. Or rather, a dwarf. In any case, they were on Spaced Dwerger, which is mainly inhabited by dwarves. But it seemed this was the first time Hiro was learning of this. After everyone was seated, the dwarf introduced herself as Sarah. The meeting began, and Sarah asked the group what kind of transport ship they were looking for. But before Hiro could even answer what the ship model he had in mind, Sarah interrupted and suggested they choose the SDMS-020 model. She began persuading Hiro that this ship model was the company's bestseller, and although it was an older design, it still had high performance. However, since it was such a good model, Hiro knew for sure it would be very expensive. But Sarah was willing to make some adjustments, and the discussion about the changes to be made on the ship began. Sarah eventually offered an exclusive contract with the company, and if Hiro signed, She was willing to offer a steep discount, bringing the ship's price down to 22 million. However, Hiro felt very suspicious because no one would just easily offer this kind of exclusive contract to anyone. Meanwhile, Sarah explained that Hiro had risen from bronze to gold rank in a short period, making him a noteworthy and promising mercenary, which was why he was receiving such a huge discount. However, instead of feeling reassured, Hiro felt even more suspicious. Why did the company know so many details about him? Why would they investigate him? What was their purpose? Before making a final decision, Hiro asked Sarah about the nature of this exclusive contract. To help Hiro understand better, Sarah simply explained that the contract would include the following terms. First, Hiro and his team would continue to use the company's mothership. They would also be allowed to use the company's ship maintenance services. Besides that, the company would regularly upload operational data to ensure the ship is always updated. And most importantly, Hiro's achievements would be used in the company's advertising campaigns. However, these 4 points were just some of the terms in the contract, as it could still be modified and developed to its fullest extent. Hiro didn't think much of it, nor did he have a problem with the first 2 terms. However, the latter terms were what made him feel a bit suspicious. To be more certain, he decided to ask for the team's opinion on the matter. According to Elma, as long as the company wasn't taking personal information, she didn't see a problem with the contract. But if their actions were restricted because of the company's advertising, Elma thought they should pass. May agreed because this could be a problem if Spaced Burgyar had to control everything they did. Once that was cleared up, Mimi wondered why the company would advertise mercenary work in the first place. Sarah explained that it was because of the operational data that mercenaries possessed. However, she assured them that only the machine's data would be transmitted, not their personal data. As for the advertising, the company would use the data they collected from mercenaries like Hiro, his team, and their catalogs as real-world data in exchange. Hiro and his team would get priority media coverage. However, Hiro still didn't understand what Sarah was talking about, so she continued to explain that the company was involved in many industries besides spaceship manufacturing, including entertainment media. One of their standout products was documentaries about mercenaries hunting down pirates, which was very popular with viewers. Since Hiro knew nothing about the entertainment media industry, he decided to ask for Mimi's opinion on the matter before making a decision. He was quite surprised to see Mimi more excited about this than he had expected. It turned out that back in the colony, Mimi had watched a lot of shows about mercenaries and hunters, which explained why she was so excited that the company was going to make a show about their team. Sarah also informed Hiro that the lives of the permanent residents in the colonies, those who travel through space, were very interesting, and so shows about the lives of mercenaries were very popular. By this point, the group had a better understanding of what the company wanted to do with their exclusive contract. Elma suggested that they should refuse the contract, but Mimi immediately objected because the company would know the team's entire lineup, and their relationships would be exposed to the whole universe, which Hiro was quite worried about. In this universe, men and women living together on a spaceship are often assumed to be in a romantic relationship, and this bothered Hiro. While Hiro was thinking, Mimi, who had no idea what was going on, asked him if it was really a problem, seeing as the whole universe already knew about their relationship. With an innocent smile, Mimi continued, saying they had nothing to hide, and that it was actually too late to worry since everyone they'd met already knew. To further persuade them, Sarah added that they would be featured separately when it aired. After giving it some thought, Hiro realized he didn't really mind. Although the company had priority media rights, they couldn't force them to accept the coverage. Besides, it seemed Elma was also fine with this, as long as the company didn't use their voices and likenesses without permission. May agreed as well, but on the condition that she would inspect the data before it was handed over to the company. In any case, according to May, since her duty was to protect her master, this was non-negotiable. So Sarah had no choice but to accept May and Elma's additional requests. However, before they finalized the contract, the group also requested more weapons for the ship, since they would need them when dealing with pirates. May also requested medium-sized laser cannons and small missile launchers to ensure their ship was fully equipped. EMLS, also known as electromagnetic launchers or railguns, unlike beam cannons, have a slow rate of fire and use physical projectiles, making it very difficult to hit moving targets. But when they do hit, their power far surpasses that of a laser. It was a special weapon that everyone admired, as it could be used effectively by the entire team. After everything was discussed, Sarah decided to end the meeting since she had to check back with her superiors. As soon as Sarah left, Hiro immediately asked May if she had really intended to do that from the very beginning, equipping the mothership with heavy weaponry. May quickly replied yes, as that had indeed been her intention from the start. Although it seemed like a good idea, Elma felt that May had overstepped her bounds a bit for a service machine. For Elma, no matter what May's goal was, provoking her master like that seemed a bit excessive. May explained that her reason for existence, her very body and soul, was to serve her master. That is, Hiro and only Hiro. May continued to explain that the current environment was ideal for her to serve Hiro, and that everyone else was just a servant. However, 98.8% of her innate abilities were being wasted. At this rate, it would take about 1,200 years for Hiro's investment to become worthwhile. That was why she was constantly pestering her master for money like this. Still, Hiro felt that things were progressing well, since this decision would expand their pirate hunting operations and significantly reduce the team's risk of death. Just a few seconds later, Sarah returned to inform the group that her superiors had agreed to their conditions, and that the ship would take 2 weeks to be delivered. Before Hiro and the team left, Sarah had one more thing to say. Since the group had accepted the ship's modifications with her company, she proposed that they also allow the company to upgrade their warship while they were at it. Since the group was buying a mothership, Sarah figured they should let the company handle its maintenance. Hiro thought this was a good time to do so, and immediately asked Sarah how much they would offer, which startled her a bit, just as he had predicted. It seemed Hiro already knew what the company was up to. After all the scans they had been through before, he was well aware that the company already knew a lot about them. The Krishna was no ordinary ship. It would be a gold mine for their engineers. This also meant they wanted to examine the Krishna's interior and technology. After Hiro saw through her intentions, Sarah tried to remain calm and stated that the upgrade would be completely free of charge. However, since Hiro understood what was happening, he immediately rejected the offer, saying they couldn't reach an agreement. As Hiro was about to leave, Sarah tried to stop him, seemingly begging him to agree. She even went as far as to say they would provide weapons worth 3 million and plenty of ammunition for free. However, May thought that it would be much more reasonable if the total value was 20 million NL. This, however, would be a discount of 11 million from the original price, which was a total reduction of 30%, something considered to be daylight robbery. As Hiro thought about this, he realized Sarah had a point about a few things. However, May stood her ground, and when she started threatening Sarah that she would release the Krishna's operational data, Sarah immediately agreed to May's terms. This came as a bit of a surprise to Hiro, as he hadn't expected May to have that kind of data on hand. So, to make sure she wouldn't do this in the future, Hiro told May that she would be punished for this later. Surprisingly, May seemed a bit flustered but also very pleased with what Hiro said, making Hiro wonder why. It seems one of the robots had a different understanding of punishment, one that brought her indescribable pleasure. After their meeting with Sarah, the group continued to tour the city. During that time, Mimi suddenly wondered where they would live once Krishna was upgraded. Since Krishna was scheduled to be delivered the next day, Elma suggested they stay at a hotel for the time being, as there was still plenty of time. Hiro thought they could just head back and find a place to stay while they packed their things. However, when they returned to where Krishna was docked, they were surprised to see everyone around acting chaotically. It seemed the engineers in town had rushed over after hearing rumors about Krishna. They were even wrestling with officials who were trying to stop them from performing unauthorized scans, which was illegal. Because of that, they couldn't get inside. Elma had no choice but to announce to the crowd that Krishna would be transferred to Egger the next day, which left everyone stunned. She even told them they had decided to have the ship overhauled, so instead of wasting time dealing with the officials, Elma suggested they should use that time to figure out how to sneak onto the overhaul team. Without wasting a moment, everyone immediately rushed out and quickly made their way to Space Edwergir. The next day, Hiro and his team checked in at a luxurious hotel. Upon arrival, they were stunned to see how incredibly extravagant the place was, so much so that Mimi began to feel uncomfortable just standing there, feeling completely out of place. Hiro started to feel the pressure too. Although he hadn't worried much about money back when he was a mercenary in the game, this level of luxury was truly stressful for someone from the lower middle class like him. Just as they were starting to think about finding another hotel, Elma informed everyone that the Sierra cost 10,000 NL per night, while this hotel was only 10,000 NL per week. This meant staying here was much cheaper than on the Sierra. Besides, Elma also thought it would be much better for a gold-rank mercenary like Hiro to stay in a hotel like this, because if he stayed in a cheap one, people might look down on him. Hearing what Elma said, Hiro was rather surprised but also suspicious about how she was so familiar with these things. Now that Hiro had mentioned it, Elma started to get nervous, and before she knew it, she began to explain, saying it was because she was an elf. And as an elf, she had experienced more in life than anyone else in the room, which was why she knew about such things. Before Hiro could ask anything else, Elma quickly told the group they should go see their room. When they entered the room, they were shocked by how spacious it was. The suite started with a living room and a dining room, and also had 4 bedrooms, a large walk-in closet, a dressing room, a bathroom, and 2 toilets. After the hotel staff gave them a tour of the room, Hiro immediately started unpacking his luggage. As he was getting ready to organize his things, May began to plead, hoping Hiro would reconsider her punishment. However, it seemed Hiro's mind was made up, as he wanted May to reflect on her actions, especially since she had gone too far this time. Although May had been expecting a different kind of punishment, Hiro ended up ordering her to do nothing at all. Specifically that she was not to serve him in any capacity other than as a bodyguard, since serving her master was a crucial part of May's existence. Being forbidden from doing so was an unbearable pain. Hiro said this method came from Atelier. The android at the reception desk had told him about it. According to her, those like May, young, loyal, and mechanically brilliant, often tended to act recklessly for their masters, and so Hiro was shown punishment methods to help May reflect. And indeed, the method was already showing immediate effects, as May now looked very distressed, hoping Hiro would allow her to do her job, because she was starting to feel a great loss of energy. Elma and Mimi tried to persuade Hiro to let May help him, since she seemed to have had a change of heart about her actions. Because of this, Hiro finally forgave May and allowed her to assist him in the negotiations. This time, however, he made May promise not to hide anything, even if it meant making a sacrifice. Mai immediately responded with an enthusiastic yes, and began to unpack Hiro's luggage. She even offered to make him tea, as they started to settle in at the hotel. Suddenly, May's phone rang. After answering, she informed everyone that it was a call from the Krishna repair workshop. They wanted Hiro to visit their shop. However, it seemed Hiro was too lazy to go there right now, so he asked May to tell the workshop that they should come to the hotel since he was their client. But it appeared May had already told them that, but they still insisted that Hiro come see them in person. Hearing this, Hiro felt a bit annoyed since he was finally about to get some rest and relaxation. On top of that, he was planning to hang out with Mimi and Elma, but because of this call from the repair shop, it looked like he'd have to reschedule for another day. May tried to suggest that they could file a complaint with Sarah from Spaced Dwerger, but Hiro told her not to, as he would go there himself. Hiro also wanted to take a walk by himself for once, so he asked May to stay at the hotel and look after Mimi and Elma. After walking for a few minutes, Hiro finally arrived at the repair workshop. He was surprised when he saw the interior of the Krishna. On top of that, it seemed the workshop was staffed entirely by dwarves. As soon as the dwarves recognized him, one of the supervisors ordered his workers to restrain Hiro as they charged at him. Hiro was extremely confused and didn't know what to do, but he felt like he should run. However, before he could make a run for it, 2 female dwarves tackled him to the ground. When he came to, Hiro immediately asked everyone if this was the company's idea of common courtesy, or just how dwarves treated their customers. Sarah, looking apologetic and remorseful, immediately replied that it wasn't. Hiro then asked why they called him here and restrained him, saying he had overlooked a lot of rudeness since his arrival, but even someone as patient as him couldn't stay silent in the face of such disrespectful behavior. Sarah started crying and tried to explain everything. Since Hiro can't stand seeing girls cry, he immediately told Sarah to wipe her tears and stop. Even though she was a grown woman, Hiro felt this whole scene was just wrong, and he felt really sorry for Sarah. He said that he would let the repairs on the Krishna continue, but the purchase of the Skid Bladnir was on hold. This time, his decision to buy it would depend on how he was treated, because she had already taken things too far. Sarah had no choice but to accept Hiro's conditions. Besides, while this was a large workshop, maintaining a mothership still incurred significant management and maintenance costs. So, Hiro was sure that these dwarves would do their utmost to please them. However, before leaving, Hiro decided not to punish the 2 dwarves who had tackled him himself, but to leave it to Sarah. It was partly because he didn't want the hassle, but how she handled the situation would also affect his assessment of Sarah. Before heading back to the hotel, Hiro hoped that this time, Sarah and her team would show him some gratitude and sincerity. When Hiro returned to the hotel, and the girls, especially May, found out what happened, they couldn't contain their emotions hearing what their master had been through. But now that Hiro brought it up, Mimi began to wonder what the problem was, and why the workshop had summoned him. Based on what Hiro said about the dwarves wanting to restrain him, Elma and the others started to think about the possible reasons why they would want Hiro, especially Elma. Elma suggested that maybe they wanted to see Hiro's piloting skills. However, May was certain that Hiro's piloting data was protected, but that wasn't what Elma was implying. The dwarves had the ability to read metal, which meant they could have recognized the state of the Krishna's thrusters, with its propulsion and other parts operating without a safety system. And they probably recognized the wear and tear on the metal. This allowed them to understand exactly how the pilot controlled the ship. That was probably why they wanted to test the pilot. For Hiro, it all depended on the dwarves' attitude. Model, but he doubted they would do anything too bad. Elma, however, completely disagreed because they were talking about dwarves. Dwarves are famous for following their impulses. They're guided by instinct instead of theory, and impulse instead of reason. This means they might just do something crazy again. As Hiro started to feel worried once more, the doorbell to their hotel room suddenly rang, startling everyone. Who could be visiting them at this hour? When they opened the door, Hiro was quite bewildered by what he saw. It turned out to be the two Dwarven girls from before, Tina and Wiska. It seemed this was what Sarah had ordered them to do, to take care of Hiro for the night as their earlier punishment. Now the question is, will Hiro let them have their fun with him and add them to his collection of girls, or will he set them free and give them a more suitable punishment? Let's find out.